Manhã, música. Ah, que isso? Abre a sacada. É seu ex-marido segurando um buquê de flores junto com um carro de som tocando um sucesso romântico dos anos 60. Foge pelos fundos, corre. Pronto. Ele nunca vai imaginar que...
Sabia que você estaria aqui, meu amor.
Corre, hotel, tocaia na janela. Silêncio? Ufa, acho que despistei. É isso, hora de dar aquela merecida relaxada. SBT. Amar é proteger. Até o seu descanso.
Today on CityCast Madison. It's the Friday News Roundup. This week, I'm joined by CityCast Madison's Haley Sperling and Rob Thomas. Trump's federal funding freeze causes confusion for cities and universities, including ours. The Madison Labor Temple is looking to sell their historic building. The CARES Community Alternative Response Emergency Services program will expand to Sun Prairie. And what was that space junk? It's Friday, January 31st. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Welcome to the Friday News Roundup, where we have a week of surprises, and some are not so fun, a little scary, a little disorienting, and then we also have some fun. So let's just get into it. Joining me today is the leader of this here podcast, Haley Sperling. Hello.
Hello, Bianca. It's been a week.
It's been a week. And our newsletter editor, Rob Thomas. How are you?
I'm doing great, Bianca.
That's good.
Trying to manifest it. Yeah.
Yes, trying to manifest. Yeah, we're just saying went to bed at 8 p.m. yesterday, which seems beautiful, but it's because the news is kind of a lot right now. I am starting out this week with details about funding from the federal government. The Trump administration has continued its dramatic action to shrink the federal government this week, starting on Monday night, sending out a memo causing to pause aka freeze trillions of dollars of federal grants, loans, and other aid funding, sending truly shockwaves throughout the country, largely of confusion and certainly some chaos, because who uses federal grants and loans? States, cities, universities, schools, nonprofits, tons of organizations, pretty much everyone. So people need to pay attention when they might be doing something illegal. So everyone got on guard on Monday when this memo dropped. Not too long after that, a federal judge did block this memo minutes before it was supposed to take effect on Tuesday. So a lawsuit was brought forward by a nonprofit just saying, like, this is going to adversely affect the vulnerable populations we serve. And so there is a stay on the freeze, and that's through this coming Monday. So we'll see what happens, but certainly not the only legal challenge. Wisconsin is one of at least 22 states who said on Tuesday, hey, we're going to sue you on this. You know, is this constitutional for you to freeze this money? So on Wednesday, the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget, who put out the memo, stated that, quote, this is rescinded. They rescinded this call. However, they say that they're going to continue the action. So just so you know, we rescinded the memo, but we're still intending to freeze money so we can do a larger review of all federal money that's being spent. So more confusion. So this is just a week of confusion, which is not very useful when folks have to make their plans. The Madison, of course, like UW-Madison is an institution that uses at least 25% of their funding comes from the federal government. Of course, our state, our city, the mayor put out a statement saying, you know, quote, this has the potential to impact tens of millions of dollars in services for the residents of Madison. So they're currently evaluating like all levels of city government. Like, what will the tangible effects of this directive be right now and into the future? And that they're going to provide more detailed update as soon as the information is complete. But city staff are working on creating an inventory and dollar amount of federal funds that the city receives and how services could be impacted. So this is happening across the board. Going back to UW-Madison, I saw a quote from Dr. Patrick Remington, UW-Madison Public Health Professor Emeritus, talking about as one grant ends, the next begins. So any delay in the process can be devastating to research who has had to lay off staff who can't commit to hiring graduate students. So I think the impact on universities and research institutions is huge. science isn't fast. And so all of these people who are relying on this federal funding and then have to stop their research, they're basically having to make life decisions on research that they may have been conducting for the past few years, for the past decades. Like, science isn't fast. So there's a lot of things to take into consideration here. But the Trump administration is acting fast in terms of them wanting to change around the federal government. So wild times.
Truly wild times. And I mean, the way that you laid this out, Bianca, is so great because it really underscores how wide-ranging of an issue that this can and will turn into, because federal funding, you think like, oh, it's just the federal government, that doesn't impact me, but it's like, it does. It impacts everyone, you know? Like, there are so many city programs, county programs, like we talked about, UW research programs that are funded by the feds. And like, all of this gets called into question when that money goes away.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are about to learn how important the federal government is in their lives. It may seem very remote in Washington, D.C., but just BRT for one thing, that was a lot of federal dollars, right? And they're sort of counting on that for the North-South line they're talking about. I mean, it's interesting because I know people who are like, I'm just going to avoid politics for the next 4 years, basically. And like, politics might not avoid you. So, and I think it has really been, it's been a wake-up call to a lot of people, like what's at stake, and that a lot of people are paying attention that we're not paying attention even 10 days ago.
Mm-hmm. And I know I shared that quote from the professor. That is from a story in the Isthmus by Liam Barron. And, just breaking down, UW-Madison receives $1 billion each year from federal funding. And so just that alone.
Yeah.
And in terms, I saw from Wisconsin Politics, they have a quotes of the week. And, right now what's on the mind is this federal funding freeze, basically. And I just wanted to share this quote from U.S. Rep. Gwen Moore of Milwaukee in response. This is more in response to President Donald Trump's crackdown on immigration, but I think it's the same sentiment. Trump campaigned on a zero leniency immigration policy, and I'm unfortunately not surprised how many people are in find out mode. He doesn't care if it costs billions in taxpayer dollars, wrecks communities, stunts the economy, or destroys the industries. Of course, that's her point of view, but the point is the find out mode. That's where I feel like everyone just like, what next? Like, what is coming? And, from his administration, I heard a quote is just like, yes, this is exactly what Donald Trump campaigned on, that he's going to need to take dramatic action. And in order for him to get in control of the federal government, the administration needs to know exactly how everything is being spent. And that's what they're saying. This is a review. But what they're trying to do is cut any funding to places that are doing research about any progressive steps on transgender rights, environmental justice, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, hearing from somebody who's talking about like a witch hunt, this is a very targeted review of the federal budget and looking specifically if people are following his executive order and not basically spending money in those areas.
We're in find out mode and we're all finding out together, and I don't like it. It makes me nervous, it makes me uncomfortable. I feel like there probably could have been a better way to go about doing this. Like, maybe before we just cut all the funds off, do something a little bit less drastic.
And I'm sure like when administrations change, there is that process where you can look over and you go, what was this previous administration doing that I don't agree with? But the idea of just like stopping it, like I saw one say the order saying they were stopped for 90 days. Like as you said, Bianca, you can't stop for a week in some of these things. And people who are promised jobs are suddenly not getting those jobs because that money stopped. So it has an immediate visceral effect on a lot of things that people care about.
And apparently, places that are early childhood education centers, like Head Start, places that receive federal funding, they went to look on their funds and it was frozen. Like, that sort of fear was struck in the hearts of so many groups and organizations. So hopefully clarity is brought forward quickly, and, we're buckling in and we'll continue to keep, an eye on this and what's happening there. But still a moving story.
It's the tip of the iceberg, right? We're
Tip of the iceberg.
not even 2 weeks into this administration, and we've got news for days.
We got news for days. Yep. And I feel like mentioning too, I mean, another big news story in the same realm is that the administration has asked just about all civil servants for a buyout. So if they agree to sign on that they will leave, they'll get certain benefits. Otherwise, there's no guarantee that their jobs will still be there. So lots to pay attention to, but we are going to move on here in Madison. Before we dive into any more news, let's take a quick break. All right. Something historic.
That's right. So if you've ever been on South Park Street, you've probably seen the Madison Labor Temple, which has basically been a home base for the labor movement in Madison for literally decades. It was built in 1958, and that was at the peak of the labor movement in Madison. And it was a place where different unions, tradesmen would come together, and it was like literal solidarity in action where they could meet up and commiserate, and my boss is doing this, and share strategies and things like that. Well, times are changing, obviously, for unions, and that's true for the Madison Labor Temple. The association that runs the temple announced that it would be putting the property up for sale. I don't know if you guys have ever been there, but like when you walk in, the entryway, there's like the three walls you see are just covered in this gigantic mural of like a collage of all these different labor images. So it's a really powerful place. It was actually the fourth headquarters for Madison's unions. The meetings used to start in the 1890s at the corner of State, West Mifflin, and North Carroll Streets downtown. Then it moved to North Pinckney Street in 1911, and then West Johnson Street in 1922, before, like I said, moving to South Park Street in 1958. But, times have changed. We've talked about Act 10 on this podcast, which limited collective bargaining for most public sector unions. There's right-to-work laws that came into place in 2015, and union participation is declining, and it's also changing. And the idea of having a physical space like that for unions to get together isn't as valuable anymore. And the association who runs it says, it's largely an event space at this point where people use the meeting room for like weddings and other large gatherings. There's a bar that's used for similar things downstairs. I mean, I think the temple might be known more for, they always have these free outdoor events in the summer where the community gets together. So it's still a community gathering space, but the Labor Temple Association thinks it's time to sell the property basically and turn it into, of course, in Madison, more housing. So they've put it on the market. It's 3.3 acres being listed for $7.9 million. And, it's a prime spot there on South Park Street. But while they're selling, labor leaders don't want to erase labor from that property entirely. One of the conditions of sale is that they want to be able to either buy or lease 20,000 square feet of whatever comes next for the next labor temple. And of course, they want union members to actually be building this new building that will be erected on the site of the old temple. So it's interesting. I think it is the end of an era for the labor movement in Madison, but it also is, in a way, as inspiring as that mural, because it's labor saying, look, things are changing and we need to change with them, and we're not abandoning the fight. And we see there has been a rush of interest in labor in the last few years. You see what's happening at Starbucks and other businesses around Madison, but tactics are changing. People are meeting virtually more, and the Labor Temple wants to evolve to adapt to that. So it's an interesting change for sure.
It seems more like a next step in the evolution of the labor movement, right? It's kind of the end of a chapter, but like you mentioned, Rob, like there really has been an explosion of interest in unionizing across many businesses in Madison and nationally. But also, like you said, these places are maybe just not necessarily utilized in the same way anymore. You can accomplish a lot of these same prerogatives with a Zoom meeting, and that's much more accessible to a wider range of people who might not be able to leave the house at a certain time to go to a meeting at a labor temple. Though, I will say I'm the first one to always be crying about the lack of third spaces in our community. And this is definitely, a big third space for people that are involved in the labor movement. I'm obsessed with the fact that, of course, they're like, okay, we will sell this building, but we want to have a part of it, and it must be built by union workers.
I love
Like,
that.
hell yeah. I love that so much. But I also do see, like, hey, if you want a part of this, they want a smaller part, like a part where they can actually utilize the space and they can actually use it to its full potential, while saying, like, the rest of this building has its history, but now it's time to turn it into something else. And I hope that the new buyers, like you mentioned that mural, I hope that that mural is preserved, because it is quite beautiful. I've seen photos of it. And I think it is just an important part of Madison's history and Madison's legacy. We're always talked about as a union town and as a radical city in that essence because of the labor movement. And so this is super important for our city. And I just think, like, the ethos of what Madison is, right?
Yeah, I feel like it's, like you said, y'all both said, it's a bunch of influences coming together, confluences at once, because work in general, folks are just moving away from needing building space. But it feels strange because we're like, not the labor temple, like don't get rid of that. But at the same time, if it's not being used, and the rent, again, it's going up and up.
Right.
Everything is really expensive to be in Madison. And so, I don't know, this feels bittersweet for sure. Such is. And we move forward and pull our resources in other places, and affordable housing is good.
No one's ever mad about housing. No, that's a lie. People are mad about housing all the time. But, like, we need more housing. This feels right. It is a prime location. Like you mentioned, Rob, this area over on Park Street is ripe for development in that regards, but not that fancy, downtown development where they're selling $4,000 2-bedroom apartments. It's like, this should be accessible to the people that use the labor temple for what it was used for,
I love the idea of a housing development that leans into the labor aesthetic. Like it's like it really would celebrate that. I think that could be really cool. Yeah.
All right, we're talking about some things in our city scaling back, and coming up, we'll be hearing about something that's scaling up, heading over to Sun Prairie. But before we do that, we are going to take a quick break. All right, what's scaling up?
Great question, Bianca. The Madison Community Alternative Response Emergency Services, oof, that's a mouthful, better known as the CARES team, is expanding to Sun Prairie starting in February. So pretty exciting stuff here. If you guys don't remember, before we dive too deep, let's back up a second and talk about what the CARES team actually is. This service was first implemented in Madison back in 2021 to address behavioral health emergencies in place of police. So this would be someone calls 911, they're having an emergency, but it might not necessarily be helpful for a full uniformed cop to show up to the situation. So that could range from anything being like helping someone work through suicidal ideations or an anxiety attack or even like a check welfare call. So typically when a CARES team responds to a call, it's a paramedic and a social worker who show up, and they leave police completely out of the situation. Police are always kind of like on call and ready to be there if needed, if a situation does turn violent. But these calls, again, they're for non-violent, typically behavioral health emergencies. And so the practice has been very successful, and it's been helpful not only for police who get to redirect their limited resources elsewhere, but it's helpful for the people in crisis, of course, because like I mentioned, adding a uniformed officer with potentially weapons on themselves to a fragile scenario, as we've seen in the past, can end in tragedy, and that's the whole point of this team, is to avert more tragedy. It's to connect people with the resources that they need in the time that they need it. And overall, the story of the CARES team is one of truly massive success. According to the nonprofit newsroom, The Badger Report, in 2024, the Madison CARES team answered more than 3,500 calls, which would have otherwise been directed to law enforcement. So we can really see there, like, this is a huge resource saver for our police force, who can and should be spending their time, enforcing laws rather than dealing with people who are in a mental health crisis who do need help and support, but not necessarily from the police officers who, while they are trained, do not have the same training as a social worker or as a paramedic, as an EMT, to understand the signs of mental illness and to see the signs of distress that are going on in these situations. So it's really huge. So the county has wanted to expand the CARES team for a while. And Bianca, you actually talked to the Madison assistant fire chief back in 2023 about this program and their expansion. And we'll definitely be throwing a link to that conversation in our show notes because that was a really great conversation that y'all had. And so this move into Sun Prairie is part of that expansion. And for anyone who might not be familiar with the geography of the Madison metro area, Sun Prairie, it's just northeast of Madison and has a population of right under 40,000 people. So this will be a big help for them. Again, like I said, in a place where police resources are stretched thin, in a place where we want our community to be safe. In a time when we want people to have access to the resources that they need, the CARES team is truly one that can help do it. And again, they've been success story after success story after success story. They started with very limited hours and limited teams. They've expanded their hours, and they now respond to calls within the city of Madison on weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. and weekends from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. And now they're expanding geographically, which is just really great to say.
It's the best.
It's a good news. It's a little bit of good news. Yes.
It's great news. I mean, if this could span the whole state, if this could span the whole country, like we've seen the outcomes are excellent. And it just makes so much sense. It makes so much sense.
And law enforcement is supportive of it as well, because it means they can focus on the things that they're trained to do and not, and like you said, Haley, be sort of forced into these roles that there are experts, mental health experts, who can deal with it in a much more productive and successful manner.
Yeah, exactly. And according to data from the city, in the first quarter of 2024, the Sun Prairie Fire and Emergency Medical Services responded to 42 incidents involving people that are undergoing, mental health crises who could have benefited from the CARES team. And their police department responded to 32 similar instances. And so based on data from calls for service between the years of 2021 and 2023, the city projects that the annual demand for CARES in the Sun Prairie area is about 123 CARES-related calls. So again, this is real help with real people and real progress. So it's exciting to see. And this is something, like I mentioned, the county is really, they put their funds up for this to put this expansion out, and it's really great.
We love to see it. We love the expansion. You know what else expands? Stars. And we've got some news this week. We got some news this week about the major stars that are coming to Camp Randall. I don't know if you guys saw, but Morgan Whalen has added a second show for this summer. So apparently there was high demand. He's like, okay, we'll give you what you want. So yeah, if you are interested in that, Morgan Whalen is going to have Ella Langley and Miranda Lambert join him. I just can't believe this is happening. And June 29th, the first concert is June 28th. And that is just, it's new to me. I don't know. I've never seen a mega concert at Camp Randall, but that seems like a really fun thing. Tickets are officially on sale to the general public today for those shows. And also, I know we've talked about it, but Coldplay is going to be coming to Camp Randall as well. And they will be here in July 19th.
Big summer for stadium shows. It's huge. We haven't had a Camp Randall show in decades. Rob's talked about it.
So if Morgan fills that stadium twice, how many people is that seeing him in Madison? That's got to be over 100,000 people, right? That's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like they'll come from all over the state. Like when I went to the Jason Isbell concert, I'm like, I don't see you guys around here very often.
I haven't seen you here before. Apparently, Camp Randall has an 80,000 person capacity. So if he's filling the show twice, I mean, yeah, Rob, you're right. Like that's almost 200,000 people.
Yeah.
But also, who knows how it gets set up to, it's like plus or minus, however, depending on how they set it up for the show, if he takes, if they add floor seats and whatnot. But no matter what, the thought still stands. Like, it's a massive amount of people.
That's a huge impact economically for us too.
Oh my God, it's going to be massive. And yeah, like you mentioned, Bianca, I think it's going to be people coming from all over. It looks like this is his only show in the Midwest. So like this is going to be drawing people from a lot of places. And that was the same thing with the Coldplay tour, right? It's like there's these mega stars are going on these very limited run tours, and they'll sell a massive amount of tickets, but that means people are traveling and it'll be a boost for Madison's little economy, like you said. Not little economy, but for Madison's economy.
Our mighty economy. It looks like he'll be in Ohio, but what is Midwest? The debate is open. And speaking about stars, what the heck was that in the sky?
I wish it was a star. It was trash.
It was pretty trash.
Yeah, in case you guys missed it, a lot of people took to the internet to report seeing this long reddish streak in the sky earlier this week. It kind of resembled like a meteor, and it lit up the sky on Tuesday nights. And while it was kind of a beautiful sight to behold, digging into it, it was quite literally space trash falling back to the earth. So not as cute. According to the UW-Madison Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences, the debris likely came from the expected re-entry of a Starlink satellite. And so Starlink, that is that Elon Musk company. Yeah, they send thousands of satellites up into space, and they spend several years in orbit, and then eventually they burn up and come back into the atmosphere. And so according to the Wisconsin State Journal, Starlink 5693 is what we probably saw in the sky earlier this week. And if it was, it launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida back in February of 2023. So it did its little rounds, and now she comes crashing down. So it's, I guess it's cool. It was... I kind of like the mystery of it better. It's like, what is this mysterious thing in the sky?
I was kind of hoping it was baby Superman coming from Krypton to land. I was like, just in time, dude. Yeah, but...
it's trash.
Not to be scary, but there's actually... Did you guys see the story of the asteroid that is headed towards Earth that has the highest risk ever to hitting the US? But it's in 2032 because it's kind of far away. We really hope that it doesn't, but there's a newly discovered asteroid that's a 1.2% risk of hitting Earth, and it wouldn't be a global disaster, but wherever it hits, it's going to hit with some force and would cause serious damage. So hopefully that doesn't happen.
Ruh-roh.
But yeah, it's like a 200-foot space rock. Right now it's 27 million miles away from Earth, but it's coming at us fast, apparently. So in 2032, we're going to find out, hopefully this thing doesn't hit us. But we don't need any space trash. We don't need that stuff around here.
It's another wait and see moment for this asteroid.
Right.
Too much. All right, y'all. Thanks for rounding up the news with me this week. Haley Sperling, our executive producer. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure.
And Rob Thomas, our newsletter editor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bianca. Keep watching the skies.
That's all for today. Here on CityCast Madison, I'm Bianca Martin, your host. We're produced by Adam Sage and Jade Isiri Ramos. Haley Sperling is our executive producer. Our theme music is by Carl Christensen. Rob Thomas is our newsletter editor. Don't forget, you can always get more news delivered right to your inbox by subscribing to Madison Minutes. And hey, if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this podcast with someone who loves space and stars and things falling from the sky? See you back here Monday morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care.